Welcome to the Long Take Review, where four college professors talk film, providing insight, not assigning homework. I'm your host, Jen Subchak-Bankard, and I'm here with two materialists. First, is he actually 5'11", or is he 5'9" and he's lying? It's Greg Cass. How's it going, Greg?
You know how hard it is to make you happy? I'm good, Jen. How are you doing?
Wow. I don't know if we should take that personally or not. And he's what we call in the industry a unicorn. It's Antonio Alifano. How are you doing, Antonio?
Talking about people. People are people are people are people. They come as they are. And all I can hope for you is a man that you can tolerate for the next 50 years who likes you at all. And you are not a catch because you are not a fish. I'm doing great.
That was great.
Glad we both chose to yell at Jen. It just feels like good energy to bring to a new episode.
So, listeners, those were all references to the film we are here to review today. Celine Song's follow-up to the breakout hit and long take review favorite, Past Lives, and that is The Materialists. Dakota Johnson stars as a professional matchmaker in New York named Lucy, who views marriage as more of a business transaction than a romantic affair. In her personal life, though, she juggles a new, seemingly perfect suitor, played by Pedro Pascal, and an ex-boyfriend with whom she reconnects, played by Chris Evans. So obviously it's a very, very starry cast in this trio. If you are listening to us for the first time, we'll have a spoiler-free section designed for those who have not yet seen The Materialists, and then, with a very clear alert, we will shift to spoiler mode for the rest of the show. Greg, if listeners think we're a perfect match after listening to this episode, what can they do?
Well, Jen, thanks for asking. If we check all their boxes, then they will not want to miss new episodes when they drop, so they should follow the Long Take Review wherever they get their podcasts. We host the feed on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com, but you can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, and more. You can also follow us on Instagram and Threads and Blue Sky at The Long Take Review and on Letterboxd at LTR Pod.
Thanks, Greg. So first, we're going to start with, as we usually do, the short take. What was your general reaction to The Materialists? I'm going to give Antonio first crack because the Past Lives episode was just the two of us, I think.
Yes. So I was really looking forward to this. I was a little bit concerned based on the trailer. I'm happy that actually I found the trailer to be kind of misleading as to what the film ultimately ended up being. I think that any modern romantic comedy will nod toward the sort of swipe right transactional nature of dating. But for Song, that fact of life is the film's reason for being. I found the central trio really charming, funny, and entertaining. I loved their like spiky observations about money and love throughout the first two acts. I did find that when those observations stop and when the sort of thorny and interesting questions stopped being asked, the movie moved into something that was a little more familiar, a little less subversive, and for me, like slightly less satisfying. But overall, I had just a really great time. I would heartily recommend this to anyone, and I couldn't wait to be here today to talk with you all. Greg, what do you think?
Nice thoughts. I'm thinking a lot about this moment Celine Song is in because I think this has become a really tricky moment for so many director writers in Hollywood, right? And it's not quite accurate, I think, in most cases to say the sophomore album because it's oftentimes just the one that follows the breakthrough, whatever they've made beforehand. And I think, Past Lives was such a beloved breakthrough, and it was her first feature, that this second attempt has to carefully thread the needle of living up to those expectations. Now, this is primarily the moment when Marvel or Star Wars or some giant franchise grabs the filmmaker. I'm thinking actually mostly of Colin Trevorrow getting yanked off of Safety Not Guaranteed, this charming little indie, and told, you get Jurassic World now. Have a good time with the dinosaurs. Or Chloe Zhao getting all that acclaim for Nomadland and be like, great, here's a Marvel movie, figure it out. And I'm so glad Celine Song didn't go that route. But you have to acknowledge that this film is just a major step up, I assume, in terms of budget, as Jen referenced, in terms of star power. And it's just like, it's a big studio movie, even though it's A24, but it feels that much bigger. instead of that kind of quiet, here's something very personal, here's something I've crafted forever. And so I would put all of that into the column of this is a wild success because it wasn't selling out. And this, I similarly had very low expectations, especially after the second trailer, which I believe did, if it didn't use the guy, it used the voice of like in a world where blah blah, and it just didn't feel good, and I was really nervous about it going in. So my expectations, I have to admit, had been drastically lowered. I had this on my list for hype draft, but it kept getting bumped down. I assume that was similar for Antonio, and that's how PT ends up winning it in the hype draft. But all that aside, this exceeded those expectations dramatically. And I think Celine Song succeeded in doing something that is still, as stealing Antonio's word, subversive, and sneaking a little bit of something special into the mold that the studio kind of demanded of it. And so I want to unpack that more. But for me, it is a definite recommend. I've been telling my wife she needs to go see it because I want to talk to her about it and just kind of parse through it a little bit more. So not a flawless film, but certainly a successful film. Now, Jen, you are probably the number one Challengers fan on the podcast, which of course was written by Celine Song's real life husband, but featured a central love triangle. How did you feel about these mixed doubles?
Wow. So that's hard to follow. I think the thing that I really loved the most about this, and I enjoyed it quite a bit actually. It's not doesn't reach the highest highs of Past Lives, but I was never really expecting it to. Sort of as we've all been saying, like since it's really hard to follow up that film with anything, and I think that this as a we can debate what genre it actually falls in, but as a either romance or romantic comedy or just something about love and romance, a story about love and romance, I do feel like the its choice to be very different from Challengers is what makes it stand out, and that is that there's no competition, right? Like as fun and electric as the rivalry is in Challengers, the fact that the two that we don't get the similar sort of like trope. I'm really trying really hard not to spoil. I just realized I almost said a spoiler. But the fact that it sort of withholds from that trope and makes it much more about the ideas surrounding dating and marriage and these concepts that I was really pleasantly surprised by, because like both of you, based on the trailers, I was like, I don't know. Really, this is what we're getting after Past Lives has I actually assumed, Greg, that it was her selling out, right? That she'd gone way more commercial. I remember, I think Ann Thompson kept saying, even after she had seen the film when it premiered, she was sort of like, oh, like this is obviously a much more commercial play. It's glossier. It has that kind of big studio feel to it, but people are still going to be kind of like, wait, what? when they actually watch it, because it doesn't really follow all the tropes of that genre. So I really liked it. Kind of tried to have it both ways, having more of a broader appeal than Past Lives maybe did, but at the same time, still Celine Song doing her Celine Song thing, which is great. All right, so it seems like we've already moved into the recommendation algorithm a little bit, and that is where we establish the audience of a film. So the thing, we've already started doing this. It's really hard after the success of Past Lives to compare this film, to not compare this film to that one. But do you see overlap? Can we base the recommendation on Past Lives? How do we position this in terms of the Celine Song's past work?
Well, for Celine Song's past work, I mean, like Past Lives, like the comparisons to Past Lives, I think that I worked very hard whenever I made my Letterboxd review to not mention, like, to not say Past Lives because it was just that was just a different thing. It was like it's a more thoughtful construction. It was less bound by genre conventions and was more ambitious. There's a love triangle that's involved there too, so that's the overlap. But really, that's the only like overlap, like the macro level overlap, with the exception of one thing that I think will make fans of Celine Song really happy, which is that which is in the dialogue and in the quality of scene construction, right? Like scene by scene. Like my concern when I watched the trailer was I was like, this doesn't look like a Celine song movie, but even though I only had one reference point to what that movie looked like. But when I was watching like those early scenes, what I was like, oh yes, like that is the voice that I love, right? And that is those are those wry observations and witty lines and just like attention to detail, that I'm here for, right? And so, I do think that it was a difficult, probably, task to distill that into a marketing campaign. So whatever, they did what they did, and we'll talk again about how this fits that genre. But I think that if you are a fan of Celine Song, that while this is very different in terms of its plot and its tone, I think that in the moment, you will recognize her like right away, like really really early.
I love that point, and it's in the words and the staging. There are
Yeah,
many. I don't think they're spoilers, but like Chris Evans has a scene right outside a bodega, and you're just like, oh man, that's the most beautiful way to shoot that moment outside a bodega, and what a real human would do, and I want to certainly unpack some of the performances, but for the most part, they felt like real people kind of observed as types that exist. I am a kind of high society Manhattanite, as I'm sure has come through in my conversations here. But they at least fit my impression from far outside that group of what those people would be. And so I think, there's nothing more to say that we haven't said. This pales in comparison to past lives, but that doesn't mean it's a bad film because Past Lives was so superlatively great and so wonderful. I will say I myself missed a little Greta Lee here. I felt like, the female
sure.
protagonist was a lot stronger in that film because of the acting chops of Greta Lee. So next to be seen in Tron, which again, respect people who get their check, but I wanted so much more. Um, so yes. And then I'm gonna just wholly cheat on recommendation algorithm and say Celine Song apparently, I think earlier this year, A24 asked her, like, what movies inspired this film? And she put out a master list, which is just incredible. And I think a worthy letterbox project for summer would be to pull up her list and just go through them film by film. I will not bore the audience by reading them all, but I will say there's a lot of like classic Jane Austen on the list, adaptations, of course, of Jane Austen. There's a lot of Mike Lee. There's some Mike Nichols, and there's some James L. Brooks. So a lot of kind of figures that I think I have not seen everything on this list, but I've never seen anything bad by the filmmakers on this list. I'm pretty sure. Like, if I either like these films or I like other films those creators have created. So it seems like she had a very specific type of tone. And I would say what's notable is there aren't a lot of rom-coms on her list, right? You're not seeing the When Harry Met Sally or any of those. So I think we should talk more about maybe the genre the studio thinks it is versus the genre that Celine thinks it is. But I think you have to be more interested in those types of romances, maybe more the romantic drama than the kind of classic rom-com. Now, Jen, you went dressed in all pink with like a cosmopolitan in your hand and just like stumbled into the movie theater. So you were expecting pure rom-com. Would you recommend this to rom-com fans?
I think if rom-com is the only genre of film that you like, I might caution. I would just try to manage much like the main character Lucy does in this film. I would try to manage their expectations because I think if you are interested in rom-com for the kind of formulaic, and I'm not saying that in a bad way necessarily, but if that's if the sort of genre formula of the rom-com and the plot beats and stuff like that are a comfort to you, this is going to actively make you uncomfortable. And in a good way, in a way that's going to make you be thought provoking and make you think about because in a lot of ways this movie is a takedown of kind of the sort of fairy tale romance like myth that we as a culture try to perpetuate about dating and marriage. And it's actively trying to pick apart that idea. And so, if that's going to bum you out, right? If you want like How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days and you watch this, you might be confused and distressed. But that said, if you enjoy, I think that the Jane Austen reference is so clarifying, because I think before I saw the movie, when I looked at this list, I'm like, that's not what I would have thought based on these trailers. But once I watched the movie, they make total sense. And it really is down to the kind of like how to navigate society and kind of balance financial security with your own sense of love and what you want out of life and out of a relationship. Like all of that stuff is like that would be in a Jane Austen story, is just kind of transplanted in some ways, not totally, but transplanted as an object of study into 2025. I don't know if that actually answered your question, but yeah. So I would just warn them. I think I think rom-com fans should still watch this. But if they don't want to, look inward too much, then maybe they shouldn't.
I will just add, I did not interview the other people in my screening, so I saw this 10 o'clock screening on the Thursday night, the opening night, and I will say there were definitely some groups that I would say looked to me like girlfriend's night out, right? Like probably had a nice dinner and came a couple wines in, and so like when Pedro Pascal shows up in a tuxedo, they were like, "Woo!" And I mean that was me, but they also seemed into it. So I was really interested because they got quiet, but it's not like they left or anything. But I would be interested to hear, like, if you were looking for a pure fun, let's all feel good, I don't think you got that. But I would say there was just enough of that flavor that I wouldn't have been mad if I left. Like there's some really solid laughs in this
Oh
film,
yeah.
and it's not devoid just because it tends a little more towards the dramatic. So yeah, I wish I could have done an exit interview, but in the end that would have been me at midnight just like following some ladies to the parking garage, and that's a bad look no matter what. Pardon me, how did you feel about the genre differences that you observed? Doesn't work. It doesn't work.
All right. I think I've almost said spoilers many times now. So I think we really do need to go into spoiler mode so we can actually talk about genre instead of talking about how we're going to talk about the genre. So if you have not seen The Materialists and you do not want it spoiled, go watch it and return for the rest of the conversation. All right. I guess we've been talking about so much, we should start with, in what ways is this not a romantic comedy?
Well, I mean, I think the first moment, I even saw this spoiled in certain reviews, was there was a reference to like violence, right? That happens, and like that the tone necessarily changes significantly when we have this moment where this profession that is portrayed initially as this sort of like glamorous thing that's available to only, like, you imagine that they're paying like top dollar, and the clientele seems sort of like worthy of like being made fun of, and like and Celine's song does a nice job of skewering all of that. And so that's all played for laughs until it's not, until we reach a moment where things get very, very real, and a character who was incredibly funny, Sophie, in her sort of initial, this sort of like whiplash of just like she's so excited, and then he doesn't like her, and then she's like, he's bald, and so that played well for the crowd who was watching it with me. But yeah, the moment when it's revealed this awful thing has happened to her and that she's been assaulted, it changes Lucy's perspective. It changes, sort of like, it just throws things into just a different sort of space, and I think that's to the movie's credit. So like, again, I've read a few critiques that think that it was sort of a misstep. I don't think that it's a misstep. I think that it is. I think that it is again part of the unique reason for being of this film. I think that the part that feels a little bit icky is that if viewed in the machinery of this film as that is part of the impetus for Lucy choosing John in the end, then that I don't like, right? Like that's not great, right? Because it's just too serious a sort of issue. Like there's a part of me that wanted the movie to sort of stick with this sort of idea about like the morality of what they're doing and with the reality of this, and for her to grapple with that a little bit more. She grapples with it a bit. She's sort of presented with this choice. It seems like she's going to leave, and that's sort of like open ended at the very end of the movie, whether she'll like stay with the company and be the whatever the New York manager or whatever in charge of the New York office or not. So I think that in a lot of ways it sticks with romantic comedy because of just certain parts of its structure and the way that it ends. And to me, that's a little bit to the movie's slight detriment because I kind of wanted it to go in some other exciting direction. As I mentioned, I thought the third act was my least favorite because there are certain things that have to happen at the end of a romantic comedy that do. But I don't necessarily love the way that we got there. But again, it's all very complicated because I wouldn't take that moment away from the movie. It's part of what made it special and interesting. And again, I thought that they handled those scenes really well. What were your thoughts?
I think that functionally, I think the intention was to have her coming to terms with how she feels about her own profession of matchmaking be concurrent as opposed to causational with what's going on with her personal relationship. It's just the unfortunate timing that the point in the screenplay when it's the most dramatic moment where she goes to rescue or help Sophie, she literally walks out the door and then kind of reconnect, like makes it official and like choose, like sort of seems like she's choosing John on the doorsteps that were like hours earlier, the moment of potentially a crime, right? Like so I think it's just like an unfortunate. It's the optics of it are not good, but I don't think the intention, or at least that was my impression. The intention is not to imply that one caused the other. They're just kind of like all happening at the same time. I think my one question about this movie was, why does she have to choose? This, up until a certain point, really felt like a movie that was going to have her refuse to choose between the two men. And that was the way in which it was going to be subversive. But I mean, to our knowledge, Celine Song is happily married. So like, so maybe that, and this film actually, I was reading today, is still, it probably isn't as personal as Past Lives in terms of her autobiography, but she was a professional matchmaker, Celine Song, for like several years in New York while she was trying to become a playwright. And so I think there is a certain, especially with the interviews with the clients, there's a certain degree of authenticity to the writing for sure. And which I sensed when I was watching it. And then when I was reading it earlier today, I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. But my whole point is, so maybe that's why she felt like she had to choose, and then the ending had to be happy because it was coming from more of a personal place as opposed to more of a genre calculation. I don't know. What do you think, Greg?
Well, I spend a lot of time with Celine Song and her husband, and it seems like there are cracks there, and that I might win her over eventually. So I am the third. I know the media has been speculating. It's me, a podcaster from my basement in Massachusetts. So
you're the problem. It's you.
And yet I am helping them creatively. So am I the hero or the villain? Really think about it.
I did go on a tangent. Sorry, Greg. I did go on a tangent earlier today. PT's not here. Someone has to do this. Where I tried to figure out how tall Justin Kuritsky is. Because I was like, oh, I wonder where he weighs in on the short. Is he short? It was not conclusive, but based on photos of him standing next to Luca Guadagnino, and Luca Guadagnino is 6 feet tall, and they look about the same height in the pictures. So I feel like he's tall. So continue. I don't know why I
Well,
said that, but
I just want it on record that I'm 6'1", and it's on my license. It's the truth. I'm not lying on any applications. So, and I already listened to a podcast about this, and they really tried to unpack tall privilege and how like tall people don't realize how good they have it. And I went on a long self journey. Like, what have I gained because I'm tall and don't know that I've gained? But I'm sure, I mean, not to work that tangent, but like, I'm sure I command a classroom more easily because I'm tall, right? And, anyway. Um, yeah, I think I'm going to summarize what you both were saying with that. Like, the seriousness is a feature, not a bug, right? Like, that to me is what makes this movie worth seeing. And it's playing in very important ways with really tough issues. And I respect that, even if it doesn't like totally land for me. I think, and Jen alluded to this, the marketing, and we've all three kind of remarked on this terrible second trailer, which is the one set to, I believe, Madonna, right? And it just doesn't click right because it's like, perfect girl, she's got it all, but she's got a problem that she's got two perfect men. What's she gonna do? And like, it really feels so at odds with what this movie is really trying to do. So I would offer that I think this movie is really trying to look at how we as kind of whole realized people kind of balance the fantasy of romantic love with the work of romantic love. And I ever since The Good Place, just my favorite TV show of the last chunk of time, sorry, Andor is my new favorite, but Good Place was before that. But The Good Place said there's no soulmates, there's just people who choose to get up every day and put in the work. And I've always loved that as like the real definition of a good relationship. And everybody on this podcast tonight is in a healthy marriage that I think we'd all say like still requires work, right? And it's hard for people outside of a marriage like that to recognize that, like, isn't it supposed to be easy? Isn't it supposed to be the fantasy? And so I think for me, the world of romantic comedy is so soaked in the fantasy, right? And it can be challenged. It's not like it's always easy or simple, but as is very famous of Nora Ephron movies, they have like incredibly beautiful houses and everything is like flawless. And it's like there's a little of that vibe here, but Chris Evans lives in the grodiest of grody apartments. And it's like, if you really love the guy, you got to go put up with his roommates who are there and having sex in the kitchen, I guess, is what happened at one point. And so, like, I really liked and respected this kind of idea that, like, what she is ultimately faced with, I mean, it's realized in her. She could have the fantasy. And I haven't seen the 50 Shades movies, but I thought they were kind of playing off Dakota Johnson's role in those movies, right? Where that's kind of wish fulfillment of a very specific kind. But it is meant to be more of the fantasy because the male figure in those, I believe, is super rich and it's part of the fantasy life. And so I didn't exit interview the women in my theater, but I feel like they were like, I just want to escape into a fantasy and falling in love with a handsome man, a tall, handsome man, better be 6 feet in a really rich lifestyle. And I think that puncturing that is what Celine Song wants to do, and yet it might feel distasteful to the audiences.
And I think that the key thing that people who are really not into this movie are kind of missing is, if you think about Past Lives, one of the most beautiful things about it was that it was very both and. Like, it sort of was like she can have a happy, loving marriage with her husband, but she can also that doesn't preclude her having feelings and being wistful about what could have been with with her childhood sweetheart, right? Like, and the movie kind of like refuses to provide a neat and clean answer about that, right? Like, she, at the end of the day, both choices would be difficult, but she has to make it, like, she makes a choice. And I think if you look at this film through that lens specifically, of it is both a business transaction. Dating is like all transactional and all about material worth, but at the same time, that doesn't preclude actually, like, I think she said something like love has to also be on the table. So like I think it is trying to embrace both points of view. It's not necessarily because I think when I started watching this movie, I was like, oh man, this is so cynical, and I kind of love it because it is like showing that everyone who's trying to date and find love are like doing it all the wrong way, and they are so hollow and vain and valuing all the wrong things. Like I think that's the reaction that you're kind of supposed to have. But then it kind of shows, well, like, but look at the alternative. Like that fight, I think the flashback to the fight in the street between John and Lucy is so powerful because it did kind of pull me back in the other direction where I'm like, oh, well, like it's much harder to have a relationship if you also have money problems, right? Like so it's not like that point of view is totally dismissed in this movie. That kind of the socioeconomic background of each person is it matters and stuff like that. So that's what I really liked about it. But I think because we get the quote unquote happy ending, it is really easy to forget that kind of nuance and then just see, oh, she ended up with choosing the guy that was her true love instead. Like I can see lots of people misreading this movie because of the ending. But did Lucy make the right choice? So barring what we think about what it does for the story and stuff like that, what like what do you think?
I think she made the right choice. And but I think my ability to answer that question really easily points a little bit to the unevenness of the triangle. I mean, Harry was great. And there's nothing to sort of fault him other than that she didn't love him. Right? And so, once she says that and that's clear, there's no way that she can choose him at that point. And so that again, that's why there wasn't this feeling of like of tension. Again, I'm loath to like compare it to like the end of Past Lives, but part of the brilliance of that was that there was like just this magnetism that was going both ways, and you could see her doing both ways and both ways being right. And that to have that happen at the end of a movie is just such an unusual thing to happen, right? Whereas, look, in a lesser romantic comedy, there's the right choice who the audience knows is the right choice pretty early on, and then there's the clearly the wrong choice who's just sort of like superficially looks like great, but then like looks handsome, looks whatever, and then like halfway through the movie, like makes some type of sharp comment that gives like a hint of menace, and you realize like, oh, okay, he's exactly what I thought. That's the bad guy, right? And so Pedro Pascal, Celine Song's too good a writer to like make him the villain, but this is not a balanced. This isn't a balanced triangle, and it didn't have that same sort of like tension at the end of it. I think that you're right, though, Jen, that the choice wasn't between Harry and John. The choice was between John and neither. And so that's also still a choice, right? And I think an interesting one, but I don't think it as a love triangle. I feel like it's a little wonky. But what do you guys think?
That feels right to me, and that's why I'm so baffled by the marketing being like, "Let's play this out."
Yeah,
I mean, at the end of the day, it's 3 super famous people.
sure.
At some point, I wanna talk about whether how we're feeling about Pedro Pascal, because we're about to get 3 really big this is the first of 3 really big Pedro Pascal movies this summer. I'm very excited for Eddington. My Marvel fandom means I have to say I'm excited for Fantastic Four, but, like, I don't know what his record's looking like these days. This role made me think a lot about him in the Wonder Woman sequel, which I was like, "Oh, right, that existed and was really bad." So,
He's
um
having so much fun in that movie though. Like
and
I
and that's not happening as much here. I think that's
mm,
exactly the difference. So, I mean, I have to agree that I think the unevenness makes it clear that she picked correctly. I would not frame it exactly the same as Antonio did. I think she was choosing between the lifestyles, not the
yeah.
men, right? And so, the kind of brilliant first sleeping together scene where he's like making out with her and she's just gawking at the apartment and is like that's what she's clearly getting turned on by, not whatever he's doing on her neck. And so like that, can you explain it? I don't know the birds and the bees. Well, we'll come back. We'll circle around to that was. Um, but like clearly it's the lifestyle and everything that comes with it, the fancy restaurants, and I do think Celine Song writes it and shoots it so that is very clear, and that you can't be watching this and thinking, oh, she's so deeply in love with Pedro Pascal, because we don't ultimately. I actually am calling him Pedro Pascal because I don't even remember his name very well, right? But he's such a blank slate. Other than, and I want to give Jen first crack at this, the kind of big reveal moment in the movie is this bizarre subplot that early in the movie they mention that some men are so insecure that they get a surgery where they break their legs to make them taller. And then we see some ominous scars on Pedro Pascal's legs, only to have it revealed that he got the surgery to be 6 inches taller, which I, to my knowledge, this is a thing that exists. 6 inches seems extreme to me, right? Like I don't think you can really adjust your height that much. Maybe you can get 2. I mean, Tom Cruise would have done it if he could have done it, right? I mean, what's the lesson of the Mission Impossible franchise? So, Jen, how did you feel about that? Like very central, very bizarre revelation in the movie.
So I thought it was great. And actually, so going into this movie, I had listened to a couple of podcasts, not necessarily overtly reviewing this film, because I usually try to not do that until after I've seen the movie. But so many people were talking about it before it had come out, like posted, like because they had seen an early screening or like because they were at the premiere or whatever, right? And so a lot of the prevailing attitude was that there was zero chemistry. The thing I kept hearing multiple times: there's zero chemistry between Pedro Pascal and Dakota Johnson. So this movie doesn't work. I think they didn't watch the same movie for multiple reasons. I'll get into it in a second. But, and then the other thing was that Pedro Pascal, like sort of in line with Greg's questions, softly questioning our faith in Pedro Pascal, or possibly our overexposure to Pedro Pascal, of like, is he really a leading man? Which is rude, frankly. But here's the thing. That scene in the kitchen after she learns or confronts him about his scars on his legs, to me, that is what unlocks that character, right? Because I think up until that point, I don't think they're supposed to have any chemistry. I think that was entirely intentional for them to be all kind of business. And I think that was the point, is that they, on paper, they are perfect for each other. And why wouldn't this work, right? This is checking all the boxes. And so I think to show that just because somebody checks all your boxes doesn't mean that you should be in a relationship with them, because there could still be something missing. I think the performances, very specifically up until that scene in the kitchen where they talk about him being short in real life, like, I think that's what they're trying to go for. And to me, Pedro Pascal, he has this one scene, and to me it entirely unlocked the character, because suddenly you saw who he really was, and you realize that the sort of debonair, oh look at me, I'm so rich, like I'm the unicorn persona was all a lie, right? And that on the inside he still feels like insecure because he needed this surgery, right? And he firsthand has experienced how his life changed for him once he added those 6 inches, right? And so to me, the way that Pedro Pascal shows for the first time up until that point vulnerability and kind of insecurity, to me was very, very important, and what made his character in the movie work, because he just seems so sad, like he like you feel bad for him. And he kind of like the part where he's crouches down to simulate what his actual height would be, and then suddenly you're like, oh yeah, you have become, you're not physically but psychologically you've become small. You know what I mean? Like he shrinks in that moment in more ways than one. So like I really liked what he was doing in this movie. But I think it's more the character than his performance.
Yeah, I want Antonio to tackle the question of the revelation, but I want to just interject that scene did not work for me until he crouched down. I'm like, yep, it's all right. Just exactly how you just phrased it was exactly for me too. And my joking aside, I'm not spending the screen time kind of drooling over Pedro Pascal, but then I was like, yeah, I feel dramatically different from you just with you looking that much shorter than Dakota Johnson. So it totally worked for me, and I need to go process some things myself. But Antonio, how did you feel about this kind of weird central moment?
I mean, I thought it was really interesting. I think that Jen is right that like up until that point, we're waiting for something, right? And again, in a lesser romantic comedy, that thing would be like some type of dramatic, awful thing. It would be like he has a secret like wife, right, or something like that. Um, What's interesting is that it puts his character in the same orbit as other characters in terms of their insecurity and their thoughts about a word that Jen used earlier, which is value, and a person's value. And I think that there is an early scene, the early scene where I was just like, oh, I'm all in on this. It involved Charlotte, the bride, played by Meryl Streep's daughter, Louisa
Ah,
Jacobson, and she doesn't want to get married, and then she doesn't want to reveal the reason, and then Lucy asks her, why do you want to get married? And because it's Celine's song, the reason is going to be good. And it delivers, right? She says like, my sister is jealous because my he's better than like her husband. Um and and then Lucy looks at her like calmly and patiently, synthesizes what she said, and just like replies like really easy, like, oh, what I'm hearing is that you are looking for value, like an affirmation of your value through marriage. And I remember thinking like, oh, that's kind of brilliant, right? Like both in the way that she's handled this and in sort of like what it's revealing about like what she understands through her job, right? And the rest of the movie, there's a lot of talk about value, right? The Harry breaks his legs to raise his value. Sophie, in that scene at the end, well, not at the end, but sort of in the middle of the movie when she's confronting Lucy, and she's so upset about what has happened to her, and what that means. I mean, what that means both in terms of like how it has affected her sort of like daily life, but also in terms of Lucy, who she viewed as a friend. She says like, you must think I'm worthless, right, for you to give me him. That what that meant was that I just kept like failing all of the men, and then so you just gave me this because this is what you thought I deserved. And like that's really heartbreaking, right? Like that was the most heartbreaking moment of the film for me. And so, and in a movie dealing with like romance, like that's not the usual thing. That's what makes this subplot so special, and I think so instrumental to what makes to what sets this film apart. um there's a little part of me that kind of wished, at least at those sort of initial phases, I kind of wanted more of like the matchmaker's revelations about sort of like what's revealed in modern relationships beyond value, because it's a lot about like that theme just recurs and recurs and recurs, and I felt like there was opportunities to have more. Like I wanted just more scenes, honestly, of like that, and of like Dakota Johnson, like some type of like love detective saying like, actually what the problem is this. Right. But I get it. Like I understand how that is the central theme that works through all the plots of the film, and this is what gets Harry, right? Like we sort of on a very crass level, we already know his value because of his money, because of all of the stuff, but we didn't understand what that it drove him internally to these to actually like change his body in a really had to be painful, significant way. So it worked for me to a degree, but it also again was this moment where I was kind of hoping the movie would move in a slightly different place, and it brought us back to a central argument, which again I thought was sort of interesting, but I kind of like found most interesting in its sort of initial presentation, and then it just sort of kept going and going. The other thing that I wanted to mention was that like, and I wanted your thoughts on this, was the way that she presents like people, right, and relationships, and the way that she talks about them, like someone at the morgue, or like a whatever insurance person or
Insurance,
whatever,
yeah.
right? Yeah, an insurance adjuster. Like that makes sense as kind of a shorthand and sort of like an initial way of categorizing people at the beginning stages. But you'd have to assume that after that initial stage, and once you have like longer conversations, that there's something else that has to happen. I mean, she's made however many marriages, 8 or 9 marriages happen, right? And so there's more to it than that, and presumably she would know that. But the other thing is, I didn't quite buy that Lucy or like any intelligent human being would just like adopt that as kind of like an ethos. Like I understand like wanting more and understanding that like love in and of itself, the sort of romantic ideal of love is not sufficient. But it her character is presented in such a way that it's just like this is like a base requirement for her and she's unapologetic about it and this is what the culmination of all of her experience has gotten. It was hard for me to resolve that the woman who was able to sort of like make that speech to Louisa Jacobson also was just like I need the next person I'm gonna marry is gonna be that I date is gonna be the person I'm gonna marry, and he needs to make this amount of money. And I was like, but you hate all of these people, and you're kind of turning into some of these people that you hate, right? What are your thoughts?
I love your thesis that we could have spent more time at the matchmaker business, because I'm also
Yeah,
like really interested in how it was presented. Like there's some definite, like, I wouldn't say mean girls, but like they're all young, super trendy dressed. Like it seems like a super like if you were a club promoter, that's who you want to come on opening night, because it's like it's that. And you know, you already articulated a lot about the relationship with Sophie. But when Sophie says, "I thought you were my friend," like I realized how perverse that was, that I like wanted to impress you because you're my friend. That made me realize like that is part of what they're marketing, right? Like and
sure.
all of the wording I could use feels crass, but this is how the movie presents it, that the clientele is missing something, right? And maybe that's just youth, but oftentimes it's implied. It's like, you know, Sophie isn't just attractive enough, right? If she could dial that one up, check that box a little higher, then she'd be easy to place with somebody. And so like that kind of high school vibe comes through to me, that like, oh, the cool girls are going to let the losers into the club and help them find somebody who they can you know, connect to. But I completely agree with what you said, that I do have trouble reconciling that Lucy, who's so good at creating marriages, why is she so good? And it would seem that it's because her philosophy is right, that if your childhood matches up, if your family dynamics then and the income levels, um and so it's hard to say that the argument of the movie is that you need to look beyond the boxes you want to check, when so much of what's built up here is that. I mean, I guess I land on that Pedro Pascal is a unicorn because he's just perfect in all of those really superficial ways. And because the kind of central dismissal is that he's just as empty as can be, then you aren't going to be happy in the long run. And I guess we learn that with her ending up with Captain America. I just can't remember these characters' names, so I'm just going to jump around. She picks
Well,
Marvel over
It's
Star
John.
Wars, so it's kind of harmful to my damage. Yes, Pedro will be in Marvel by summer's end, but at least at the moment. Um, but I do think I imagine, you know, you hear writers talk all the time, and I don't know Celine Song's process, about how they like find the hook of a movie that gets them interested. And I think her sharing these really vapid experiences, she was like, I gotta show people what it's like, and I gotta think about this. But then it becomes troublesome to pull Lucy out of that world and present her as she is. In the moment of the revelation, Lucy also admits, I guess, a nose job and a boob job in the moment of like his. And so you realize she's just as awful as the rest of them in some regards. She's as I shouldn't say as awful. She's as superficial in some regards and is throughout. And her ending up with John, I almost said Chris again. Her ending up with John, I think is supposed to show that she moves beyond that. But it's not like I thought, oh, good, they're going to have a happy life. I'm like, okay, they're committed to the hard life together. I have questions about like her whole lifestyle, that she can afford cosmetic surgery in a really nice apartment on a salary that would not get you very far in Boston. And I believe New York is harder to get along in than Boston. So I have some questions about all that, but I did think that it was a shame that those two pieces didn't quite click as well as I wanted them to, or I'm missing something. Jen, what was I missing? Solve it.
I had 1,000 thoughts while you were both were talking, and now half of them are gone. But I think part of it is there's a sort of valorization about the self-awareness and self-honesty of the philosophy of like, hey, let's just and I think I don't remember who she's talking to, but she says at some point, my clients treat me like their therapist because I'm the one person who has given them the green light to admit deep down the kind of dark, embarrassing things that they actually desire and care about, like the things and that they would be too ashamed to admit to other people. And and I think that's the power of that scene with Charlotte when she's kind of getting cold feet, right? She kind of helps her reconnect with, or kind of normalizes the idea that you don't have to want to get married to a person because you only love them, right? It's okay to have this other kind of more value market kind of reasoning, to and that's okay. Like she kind of tells her that, like, they kind of call it for what it is, right? She admits that she likes making her sister jealous, and then she kind of recapitulates that as, right, so you just want to be valued, there's nothing wrong with that, right? And so I think the first half of this movie kind of presents this philosophy as, you know, cynical but pragmatic and kind of realist in a way that is not necessarily bad. Um, and it's the same thing with the conversation, the dinner conversation between Harry and Lucy, when he kind of counter argues, the thing you're not seeing is that I have all the material value that we both would need. Therefore, I can prioritize what he calls intangible assets, right? So like her
Mhm.
personality, her worldview, right? How like how she is a conversationalist. I guess there's a whole list of things you could potentially populate, um, or a list of qualities that you could come up with for that. But he sort of says, well, because of my financial situation, this is what I'm looking for. And so what you don't fail to understand is that you undervaluing yourself is actually irrelevant to this conversation, right? And so like it's really interesting that all these conversations about value and worth and sort of market price, right, crudely, like is presented as maybe like maybe distasteful, but ultimately real. Um, and then something
Sure.
happens after Sophie's assault that flips that, I think, to be like, well, what if I've had it wrong the whole time?
Since you mentioned her undervaluing herself, I want to. There's a line that she says to both men, and I think that how you as an audience member receive and hear that line will say a lot about like what you ultimately think of Lucy. And the line is, "You don't love me," right? She says it to both of them. Um, now, on its face, someone saying that to someone, it sounds like self-deprecating. I'll have to admit, I found it like annoying. um, and the reason is because on the surface, it's like you're pointing to some deficiency in yourself, right? But in fact, it's also pointing to a deficiency in the perception and the feelings of the people in her life. It's devaluing their feelings. It's putting her perceptiveness above theirs. Um, and so there was a little part of me that was just like, I wasn't quite sure why people loved her so much, especially John. I mean, I guess John didn't love her, right? That's the point that we sort of got. No, sorry. Harry doesn't love her. John does love her. Um, but that flashback uh, is pretty electric and really searing. And while it's good, I guess, that she's self aware about the things that make her sort of superficial and ultimately will make their lives really difficult if they continue on moving forward. That doesn't mean that the awful, like, to me, what sounded like kind of awful, pragmatic, but kind of awful, especially to hear from someone that you love, right? And that you've been in a relationship with, that doesn't change those things. Um, so the thing that I had with John, because he has these beautiful, like, monologues toward the end, but I had a hard time believing that he was sort of just in stasis for that so many years, waiting for her. Like, I believed it in past lives because Nora was just Nora. She was so funny and brilliant, and I could understand how her imprint would endure. But Lucy, not so much, right? I mean, again, we're given the what we're given of her in the past is pretty limited and is pretty, raw. But again, to her credit, I think she presents herself as someone like, I know who I am, and that includes my limitations, and that includes my value, and I know what that is. I see actually why Harry values that, right? Why someone in his position, why someone with his worldview would like that pragmatic partner. John, it's a little bit less clear. Maybe that's part of the point, is that love doesn't fit boxes, right? Like as Greg sort of said earlier, that it's just something that's just this sort of inscrutable thing that doesn't always align with logic. But I don't know. It was the part of that made that I think this is part of the issue also with why the ending wasn't quite as satisfactory to me. Not just because it ends in the way that romantic comedies end, but because this particular pairing, it's not like I was just like, these two need to be together. And maybe again, this is just like the presentation of that arc is always going to be a little bit of a lie and will require glossing things over. Because my impression was, and again, I think this is to the film's credit, that it's not happily ever after for these two. It's like, maybe they'll make it. Maybe they'll make it, like, or maybe they'll like get divorced in a year, right? And that's just sort of that's just sort of the choice. And like, she's made her choice, and that's a perfectly fine choice. Oh yeah,
The
Jen, what
one,
do you think?
the
I can
one,
see
the
it.
one
Yeah.
thing the one thing we haven't mentioned yet, which I think is really crucial, is in
Hmm.
that final proposal scene, the thing
Hmm.
that directly precedes it is the phone call about how she could, if she chooses, get this huge promotion and negotiate any salary she wants, right? And that is the Jane Austen uh sort of hermetically sealed ending. You know what I mean? Of the like, oh, how convenient, right? And everything's going to work out. And I really liked that was dangling there to be like, well, in theory, this financial thing that just is potentially happening to her, should she choose to accept it, right? Um, is sorry, now I'm thinking about Mission Impossible, and how different this movie would be with Tom Cruise in it. Like the convenience of all, it will all work out because the financial piece is there. I think if we had to think about the
Thesis, please.
thesis of this movie, is that like, yes, love is grand and maybe it's inexplicable and intangible and you just know it when it happens to you, but at the same time, marriage doesn't work unless all of these other less
Mm.
glamorous pieces are in place, right? The financial part. Like, I think it really is making a strong argument for like, we can't ignore the fact that people are happier when they're financially secure, and that marriage and love is easier when that's true. And that's a very cynical thesis, I think, but the fact that that's in the ending scene, to me, it all makes a huge difference. Like, imagine that, not that whole conversation on the phone that she has with her former boss, soon to be former boss, is removed. Really changes the tenor of that proposal scene, right?
You made me think about Pedro Pascal in Wonder Woman 1984, who kept saying, "Life can be good, but life is good, but it can be better," right? And like, I do think there's a little of that in that ending scene. It's like she's going to seemingly accept the lesser life, or the life of lesser comforts, in order to be with this person. And that's also true for him, right? That he says, I think the scene before that, how he's like going to pick up more catering shifts and he's going to go out for commercial work because, I mean, it hadn't really been present there, but the implication is like he's stayed true to his dream of being a theater actor. Um, and in case we don't get back to it, his warehouse theater performance is so
So good.
brilliant. And like, I'm not somebody who's been to a lot of those, but I'm like, I can tell. And I hope you both noticed that outside there's a sign for a Celine Song play. Did you notice this on the
I
wall?
did not.
Oh.
When they're talking to each other, one of the signs, it has to be one of her early plays, I imagine. So it wasn't that she directed that play, but it was like she's going up tomorrow night for the entry fee or whatever. So um I think you're right that the film's thesis is ultimately that marriage is not the fantasy, but it is also not purely business. But you can't ignore the kind of financial implications of this. I mean, it's much better drawn, but I really thought of Saoirse Ronan's monologue in Little Women, right? About how she doesn't want to be a bride and have all her work and knowledge and life kind of given to her husband in the economic relationships. I mean, I guess that's a little more Amy in that film too. But there's a lot of that tension and I don't think Little Women made the list, but it would totally fit in as the American counterpoint to a lot of those Jane Austen and George Eliot and Edith Wharton, I think, got name checked in some of the materials too. So I do think that to take you at your question, Jen, now that I've rambled a lot, is like, I do think that it would be a lot different without that conversation. But my read was not that she was going to sign on to that. And the balance of like, the earlier argument, she says, I don't want our anniversary to be eating from the halal cart. And then the final scene is like, guess what? Your life is eaten from the halal cart. And I don't know if we're supposed to think she's now content with that or just to recognize that, love means you uncheck a couple boxes and that you're not going to have absolutely everything. Life is good, but it can be better. And you just have to sacrifice I'm not going to have that better life in some cases, unless the fabulously wealthy marry the fabulously wealthy. And then they're all just happy and no worries.
And I think that that concession is both very Celine Song, but also very kind of what makes this movie stand out against others kind of that adhere more to genre conventions, right? Because I kept thinking, if this movie came out in the 90s, what we would end with is showing Lucy as the new boss in her office. And it's kind of like, how at the end of Monsters, Inc., they change how they're doing things.
Yeah.
And they're like, well,
That's
now
right.
we
That's
use
exactly
laughs
right.
instead of scares. So like a 90s version of this movie would end with Lucy being like, instead of asking what height you want, what age you want, they would be like asking more profound personal questions about like, what do you do on a summer's day? Or like, you know what I mean? Like it would be like, and it would be so cringy.
Yeah.
But that's what the rom-com version of this movie ends with. That she
her own
reforms matchmaking.
agency and a new interview. You're absolutely right. I hadn't thought about it, but you're completely right. And so I admired and we've talked before, like, I love some ambiguity, right? Like I love leaving it open and leaving it unclear. And I do think this movie excels because it doesn't put a neat little button on it. And the Rewatchables has that great question of they named it the Se Wataneo after Shawshank Redemption, but like, what happens the next day? It's like, I don't know that they're together forever, but I'm fine with that, right? Because they'll get their moment of happiness again, and maybe it sticks, and maybe it doesn't. But that's life.
I haven't even looked at this list of questions for a while.
I have a couple questions I want to throw out there. This can be speed round. In some ways, I feel like we three are the worst to comment on this. So I am too old, and I've been with my wife too long. I didn't do online dating at all. Did either of you online date really? Or you? Yeah.
A little. Yeah. A little
I
bit.
did for like 2 months. It was awful.
And that's my impression. And every time I try to empathize with friends who are still online dating, I'm like, I don't understand it. I feel really bad for you. And it sounds terrible. And so I wonder if the humor just hits a little different if you've somebody who've been like through the trenches on it. Do you think that could be the case?
Yeah, I think I remember. So I did online dating. I also did there was a time. This was when I was a lawyer and in New York, and I didn't have a lot of time. And I remember that one of the things that I did because I did speed dating. I did speed dating so many times that I was like, I think I'm a speed dater now. Like that's how I just do it now. But I remember what was interesting was like because I can go through. I mean, it's just it's like a montage right away, right? Of often just like awful things where someone says something and you're like, no, you like someone like identifying my race incorrectly. And you only have like 5 minutes. So like when that happens, it's just like, all right, let's write out the clock and then we'll move on. Right. So, yeah, there were the parts about dating I thought were just incredibly fun and funny. And that's so I was really locked in. And that's the moment when, like early on in the movie, where I was like good, here we are, right? Like this is going to be great. And the audience was totally with her too, right? And the audience that I was with was a mix of sort of like our age but also younger, but everyone. I think it appealed to everyone, and there was resonance with like everyone there, right? So yeah, like it's been a while. Like I've been married long enough to where like that thankfully is like a distant memory. But like um I think that the part that, because earlier in the outline there was this question about like what felt true to you, and I hate to be like the bummer to keep going back to Sophie, but like the roller coaster of Sophie was. I just felt like a powerful through line of the movie, because at the beginning she is played for laughs. I don't think that, did either of you watch Succession?
No, I've heard she's
No.
So
good. Everybody connects
she's
with that.
good.
Yeah.
She's good. She plays like a famously pathetic character in Succession, and involving like a romantic relationship too, right? And so part of this was that like I have that memory of her. That's what's in my head. And then her first scene is her being humiliated, right? And just being excited and then immediately disappointed and then angry. And so what was what was surprising and really great about like her arc was that she was given a moment where she got to be not the butt of the joke, but just sort of like, like a heroine in her own sort of right, and that she got to voice like an anger that I think a lot of people have, um, and a lot of frustrations that like a lot of people have when they're dating, and when they're doing the really brave thing by like putting themselves out there. It is a brave thing, right, to like go out on dates and to like subject yourself to the scrutiny and judgment of others. And then um and to have like on the one hand you're just like, well, you have this intermediary who makes it easier. But as we see in the film, and I think it's another astute point of the film, is that through Sophie, is that it actually makes it like doubly humiliating, though, right? Like it's not just a thing where you can just be like, I can just like let that go and I'll just forget about it. There's like a human being who is calling you, who is checking on you, who has a record, right, of your successes and what people have thought of you, and that adds just like this additional pressure. So that part of it is obviously like unfamiliar. I could not afford such a service as this when I was in New York, but like but yeah, I felt like they did that stuff well, which was why I kind of wanted it to exist in that space for a little bit longer before it moved and focused in on the love triangle.
I have a couple people in mind that I'm planning to ask to go see this movie and give me feedback, because they have been in the trenches with dating for so
Yeah.
long and more recently. And
Mhm.
the thing uh that matched up and felt very authentic, just based on what the friends who are still dating have told me and have been frustrated by, the idea that like being nice and being all around good but not somehow like weird and exciting is a real frustration. That like you can't just like the swipe culture of a lot of these dating apps is biased against people who are not anything particularly unusual but are nice and good. And like I hesitate to use the word fine because that has a slightly negative connotation, but you know what I mean. Like the frustration Sophie has, where she's like, what's wrong with me?
Mhm.
Nothing's wrong with you. It's what's wrong with everybody else who's doing this, right? um and the culture of dating that has kind of distorted people's expectations and ambitions to a point where no one's happy. And I do think that felt very, based on hearing friends vent about online dating and when it doesn't work, and how people say that they, seem to really connect well with you and then ghost you, or like um say, "Oh, you're so great, but I don't know, there's nothing there," or something. You know what I mean? Like that can be extremely frustrating because you're like, "I don't know what else I could be doing." And I think that came across really well in the movie through Sophie primarily.
Yeah, I feel like I know so many people who have told me horror stories of like having a good date. We seem like we're connecting. the people I'm thinking of happen to both be men, or it's like the woman seemed to like me, was laughing at my jokes, and then I got up and went to the bathroom and she was gone by the time I came back. Or like well, I should keep it vague. Another story where like a girl straight up said at the end of the date, like, oh, well, I'm only here because I don't have enough money to go to restaurants, so I don't really want to date you. Thanks for dinner, goodbye. And like, it's just like, it's so bizarre to me to imagine like that this is how you're trying to find love. And I do think the movie made the clients, I mean, not all of them, particularly Sophie, really sympathetic. I think the men are just complete, losers in some regards. The guy who says like she's got to be in her 20s when he's like in his 50s, I'm like, this is just a gross dude who I'm sure exists, right? But I'm sure that's ripped right from her experiences. Second speed round question, because we haven't mentioned it. Cavemen. Thumbs up, thumbs down. So there's a weird, for if anybody's listening and has forgotten, and no spoilers, there's a weird framing device that is like the story of the first marriage with these two cavemen, and they are brought up at the beginning. And then I will say, when they came up at the end, I was like, oh God, that was this movie I saw those in? Like, I can't believe they're back. So Antonio, articulate vocally what you just showed us gesticularly.
Thumbs down. I also, did you notice in the end credits that the cave people showed up again in the city hall? Did you see that? Did you notice that?
I saw that
Oh.
Hasib noted that in his letterbox review.
Oh, I
And I
thought
was like,
Hasib was
how did I
making a
miss that?
joke. Oh man, that's crazy.
No,
Yeah.
no, they're there. They're there. Yeah. So I didn't like it. um, I I I just didn't like it. It
Did you
didn't.
did you notice that the background behind John before he proposes, I believe, is the museum that has like a caveman exhibit? So
Yes,
they're
I saw.
Oh,
everywhere.
yes, I did. I did notice that. I still didn't like it. It's I if part of the point was something about sort of like what's sort of hardwired within us in relationships and what we value in relationships, and that's just part of like okay, but it just seemed silly to me in a way, like especially in a film that sort of changes tones a lot. Like that seemed like an unnecessary flourish that didn't add anything to the modern story. Like I don't feel like that I there's any depth added to like the revelations about today by linking it to like cave people. But I don't know. What did you all think?
I was okay with it at the beginning
Mhm.
because I felt like the point of it was to show their baskets of material goods and that they're like being all lovey-dovey, but at the end of the day it's because she has a basket of fruit and he has a basket of weapons or whatever. But then I thought it was extremely cheesy when it came back at the end. I was like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
No. So actually the beginning part reminded me a lot of the opening to Barbie. And in that sense, I was like, oh, cute. Like it's a cross reference to that sort of, or like it's this kind of like, people have been bad at dating since the beginning or whatever. But then when it
So
became like a bookend, I was like, oh no.
so Jen, that scene in Barbie was actually based on one in 2001: A Space Odyssey. I guess you didn't
Yes,
catch that. No, I'm just kidding. Because I agree. I thought that's exactly what it was kind of going for, and I actually didn't love it in Barbie either. I mean, in Barbie it's more of a parody, and the parody works kind of, but like I rolled my eyes, and it didn't work for me. And I have no idea about the production of this, but that felt to me like if she had final cut, that is something the studio would have been like, let's ditch the cave people. We don't really need this. But all right, those are all my speed round questions. Just two.
There's one other thing that I just wanted to mention really quickly, which is that the scene. So my opening was in response to one in the montage of just sort of like awful clients, and this was a client who just had like this, basically like it looked like a CV, right, that she had invented for this like ideal person. And it wasn't just the CV, it was her tone of voice, and it was just the way that she was talking about like, this is what I want. And this is what I think that I deserve. And then Dakota Johnson just like has her very honest sort of like, nope, that's not how this works. That's not how people work, and whatever, right? Um, but that does feel like the product of someone who's like read a lot of books about how to like value yourself and like how to, and had a lot of friends tell them like this is what you should insist on, and like and maybe someone who like has grown up internalizing the like traditional romantic comedy, and it's just sort of like if you just never compromise and you just like value yourself enough and look in the mirror and see the beauty, then everything is going to work out, and you shouldn't settle for anything less than like the very very absolute most wonderful thing in the world, right? And so I love that moment. It's hard not to love that moment and not to love that woman's face, like, you know, I don't think they actually show her face in response to like Dakota Johnson's whatever, but you can just imagine what that would look like, and that's a really satisfying moment. But so I like that. I mean, it's a little bit of sort of like low hanging fruit to take down these people who feel so entitled to like this kind of love, but like it is very satisfying, right? And this goes back to Jen's point about how it is part of the romantic comedy genre at the same time it is critiquing it, and that to me was one of the sharpest, sort of most obvious critiques of the limitations of like that way of thinking.
Yeah, and don't forget that it's also kind of a class critique too, right? Because Pedro
Oh,
Pascal
sure.
has that bit about how he's complimenting Lucy, and he's like, "You're doing such a good job of convincing all of these people that you are a luxury service that they don't need, because that would be insulting, but they want as a convenience or as a shortcut, right?" And there's many comments throughout the film about the sense of entitlement of like people feel like they're due a perfect match, right? That they so I think you're right. That is like a weird byproduct of self-affirmation of like or self-esteem, trying to encourage people to have better self-esteem of like, don't settle. Because I think Sophie even says, I'm trying really hard not or trying really hard not to or trying really hard to settle. Yeah, that's what she says. Trying really hard to settle. Um so yeah, it's interesting that there's definitely a biting commentary about both the entitlement, but also sort of class privilege attached to matchmaking specifically.
Was almost my opening quote was Sophie's, "I'm asking for the bare minimum. I'm trying to settle," which is just another great
There we
line.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Oscars watch.
Speaking of settling, Jen, why don't we go to Oscars watch?
Thanks, Greg. Always with the segue. So, as a reminder, Celine Song's last film, Past Lives, got 2 Oscar nominations. Did not win either one, but got 2 nominations. Really went on a roller coaster because it seemed people expected, I think, it to do a lot better with nominations. But then by the end, I remember we were just relieved that it got something. So it did get nominated for Original Screenplay and Best Picture. Is there any hope? I think I know the answer, but is there any hope of either of those or any other Oscars repeating at this year's Oscars with Materialists?
Maybe screenplay. It's maybe, but I think probably not. I think probably not. It's. I think it's going to be too difficult. This will be a situation which will be too difficult for I think voters to put this and past lives in two separate sort of contexts. Um, it would be strange to me for this to match the Oscars like nom total of that film. Um, I mean, maybe I think screenplay is its best bet. I don't think any of the performances probably will get attention. I don't know. What do you think?
What I think is really interesting is I would say they thought the Past Lives campaign worked, and so they're gonna run that playbook again. Because as Jen said, like I think in June we're often so hungry for something awards baity that we get really excited when a good movie comes through. But the problem is that June is so very, very far away from, January that it just kind of fades and people, forget about it. I mean, purely and simply, it's not on their mind. Now, of course, things that come out in March sometimes survive, Everything Everywhere, Coda. But I think a film that comes out in June has to either be like a 100% critics find it flawless or a big surprise box office hit, and I can't really see this film managing either. I find myself rooting for Chris Evans because I think he got sucked into the Marvel machine and he did great work, but deserved better. Jen told me I need to not be excited for the Joel Cohen movie he's about to be in because it's going to be bad. So I'm trying to put that aside as well. And I have found myself struggling a lot with Dakota Johnson. The only thing I really liked her in was the Maggie Gyllenhaal movie with Olivia Colman and
Lost
Jessie
Daughter.
Buckley. I totally missed it again.
The Lost Daughter.
Lost Daughter, yes. And other than that, I don't find her compelling. I find her beautiful, which I think is half the job here. But like, I don't know. I don't find this to be a captivating performance by any of the three leads. And so I think screenwriting is the outside chance. Or they're pushing very heavily that Japanese Breakfast did an original song for the soundtrack. I believe it's the one that plays over the credits. And Japanese Breakfast appears in the film. And so, by my normal rules, that's a pretty fun way to get a nomination. So I'd send that one.
Yeah, I'm similarly not very optimistic just because if Past Lives can only get 2 nominations, I think because just by comparison, this one's not as strong. Logic would dictate that it's not going to get anything. I would actually like a screenplay nomination. I think that would be nice. I did really like the dialogue in this. To defend Dakota Johnson briefly, I do think she is perfectly cast in this role. So I think if people have problems with her performance in this movie, it's because they don't like Lucy. Because I think her sort of trademark kind of like poised aloofness, I think is what they were like. I think that's why Celine Song cast her as Lucy. You know what I mean? Like, so, can she do anything? Her range may be limited, but I think she's a good fit. She was a good fit for this role.
Spoken
And I
like
really
someone
like.
who didn't watch her Madam Web press tour that carefully. I'm on to you, Jen. I'm on to you.
I totally ignored that movie. I haven't seen it. I want to preserve my sanity. But that's cool about the song. I didn't realize that. So yeah, if it gets a little bit of love, the only wild card scenario I can imagine for this is if somehow the dating commentary in this resonates with people who are currently dating so much that they kind of like advocate for it in some way and it gets some extra buzz boost. I don't know what that translates to necessarily, but that would be the only way in which this would maintain or sustain a campaign as a contender in any way. But I think the year is going to be pretty strong for original screenplay. It's really stacked and adapted, but I think it's also going to be pretty tough competition in original. So I think this probably doesn't do anything. All right.
So sorry, I was just quickly looking at box office because it is interesting. So obviously, this past weekend, How to Train Your Dragon just destroyed everything, which I think was pretty much expected because it's a family affair. But Materialist did do pretty well. It managed to fall just shy of its expectations, but 11.3 million for biggest A24 opening after Civil War and Hereditary, which, that means a lot of people saw it. We'll see what the drop off is. But to my point about the playbook being run right now, I think part of the problem is there's this little specialty box office window, and Wes Anderson crammed a movie in it, and Neon crammed Life of Chuck into it. And then you get A24 with Materialists. And it's like, there's not a lot of counter programming bucks. And those are 3 movies that I think a lot of people would say, I can see that at home on streaming and really get the same experience. So we'll see how big the legs are on any of those 3. One of them might
I
dance its
think
way into the hearts of people, but this one won't.
Right. If anything, box office is going to be purely from the 3 leads of this have huge fan followings that they don't care what the movie is. They'll just go see.
Yeah.
Especially Dakota Johnson fans. They do not care what movie she's in. They just like her. So they will go see whatever. So yeah, we'll see if that pans out. All right. Well, I think this episode really panned out. See, I'm trying to do. That was a terrible segue. Antonio, I'm really glad we got to talk about this. Hopefully, this sated your desire to unpack it. Where can folks find you? And I think there's only one place.
You can find me on Letterboxd at Aelefano, Aelefano. Greg, where can people find you?
It was a pleasure being in a love triangle with you two tonight. It seems like we worked out all our differences and mutually appreciate each other and the film. So people can find me on Letterboxd at Ion Cannon, EYEONCANON. What have I been up to? I had my perfect Father's Day weekend seeing Empire Strikes Back in the movie theater Saturday night and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade in the theater on Sunday night. What did I rate them? You'll never be able to tell what those two movies rate in my book. So, Jen, if people want to find you, where can they go? Besides the 10 a.m. Materialist screening on a Monday morning at your local Regal Theater.
Yes, which only had, when I texted you, only one other person was in the theater. Another person showed up. You can find me on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at Sopchockchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI, and on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jen. I don't have an outro.
Let's go watch Past Lives.
Done. Oh, yeah. That sounds great. Thanks for listening. You can follow The Long Take Review on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free, and you'll be the first to know when a new episode drops. You'll also receive written reviews of new films with Oscar buzz, as well as any new installments of prop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.